they had put it at about 15 minutes for the original strain. It's very likely that 5 to 10 minutes could make you contract this new strain of the virus because there are more viral particles in the circulation. So that's important. They put it at about 15 minutes. This virus as being two-dimensional because that's the issue. But I want you to start thinking about it as three-dimensional now. And the membrane is not rigid. It's constantly moving, right? So keep that in the back of your mind. And so the spike proteins also is not just one protein. It's actually 3 pieces of protein together. And why am I teaching you this biology? Because it's going to be important for you to understand how the vaccines work. And so you have these 3 proteins come together. They can open and close at the tip. And this is actually in this conformation when it actually binds to the angiotensin converting enzyme receptor, ACE2 receptor, a protein that we need in our bodies to help maintain blood pressure, among other things. And so the virus exploits that and uses its spike protein here to bind to that ACE2 receptor. And I'm going to show you a little bit of a movie now to explain to you how this is happening.
Due to its unique features, the novel coronavirus is particularly good at infecting new cells, both in the upper respiratory tract as well as deeper down in the lungs. Here's a look at how the process takes place. The microscopic virus enters through the nose or mouth, where it begins its infection of our airways. The outer spike protein of the coronavirus latches onto specific receptors on the surface of cells in our respiratory tract. In the case of COVID-19, the virus latches on to the ACE2 receptor. This binding triggers the process by which the virus fuses into human cells. The viral envelope merges with the oily membrane of our own cells, allowing the virus to release its genetic material into the inside of the healthy cell. The genetic blueprint of the virus is RNA instead of DNA, which acts as a molecular message, instructing our host cell machinery to read the template and translate it into proteins that make up new virus particles. The hijacking persists as the human host cell continues to generate more copies of the virus, assemble these copies into viable particles, and traffic them to the outer edges of the cell for release. Each infected cell may produce and release millions of copies of the virus, which can then go on to infect other neighboring cells, as well as neighboring people when they are expelled from the airways in droplets via coughing and sneezing.
And so this is just an idea of the process of infection, and this is essentially what the virus does. When it infects a few cells, it can come out with tens of thousands to millions of copies of the virus, which now infects new cells, and that you can actually exhale, or it can come out in your saliva and infect new people. I like this quote from the World Health Organization, where it says, the 2 public health interventions that have had the greatest impact on the world's health are clean water and vaccines. No other 2 public health measures have been so successful at preventing disease overall. So what are vaccines? Vaccines traditionally have been pieces of the infectious microbe that are given to individuals in order to stimulate your immune response so that when you actually see the real thing, you're ready to go. In other words, it's a way of priming the immune response. And vaccines typically have water and several other ingredients in there. And adjuvant is a component that helps to boost the immune system so it actually sees this piece of or whole viral particle or bacterial or fungal particle that you're putting in it. But why is it that we need vaccines if we have functional immune systems? And people say this all the time. And this is an important question. The reason is that this part, the immune system can be divided into 2 different parts. What we call the innate immune response and the adaptive immune response. The innate immune response is simply the fact that you're a human being. There's certain things that your body sees as foreign and it responds to them immediately. And your innate immune system tries to get rid of them. Typically, it never does. It never completely gets rid of whatever that invader is. So the adaptive immune response kicks in. And when you hear people talk about antibodies, that is a product of the adaptive immune response. Now, the cells in our bodies divide approximately once a day. Microbes like bacteria can divide every 20 minutes. And like viruses, within 7 to 72 hours, you can have tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of new viral particles. Now, The adaptive immune response is slow. So this curve that I'm showing you, the peak of it is really at about 14 days. And that is why you're able, when you get a cold or you get even the flu, people are able to tell you that within 2 weeks, you'll feel better, right? Your immune system kicks in and it's at its peak in about 2 weeks. However, with certain infections, like SARS-CoV-2, like the COVID-19 disease, for some people, that's too late. You would be dead by then if you're waiting for up to 2 weeks, 10 days to 14 days, in order to get the strongest of your immune response. So what you do is that you give a vaccine. Vaccines would be this initial antigen. Antigen is any foreign protein that you're putting in. When you put that in, you get this initial response, but I want you to show you what the secondary response looks like, either for a booster vaccine shot or if you actually encounter the pathogen. Number one, not only do you get a higher response, but it's a much faster response. What took 10 to 14 days over here now takes just a day and a half to 2 days because the system has been primed. You have circulating antibodies that have been produced specifically against that microbe, as well as memory cells that are circulating, that when they see this pathogen again, they're able to respond in a short time instead of this long buildup that is necessary. In other words, you have the pathogen and it's in the database of the body and the body can respond quickly. So the reason for this, the reason for actually having this initial break is that it doesn't matter how well you've eaten. It doesn't matter if you've always lived on a vegetarian diet. It doesn't matter if all your vitamins are in place. Nothing at all substitutes for that initial primary immune response. Without that, you're still going to have to wait 2 weeks in order to have that strong response. And that is really important when you're thinking about a vaccine. That's what the vaccine is going to do. It will give you this head start so that when you actually encounter the virus, you already have in your circulation these neutralizing antibodies or these antibodies that can bind the virus up, as well as memory cells that are ready to go to produce more of that entity that you need. And do vaccines work? Of course they do. We've seen that with all sorts of examples of diphtheria and pertussis and measles. You can see how many infections you have by the size of the circles before a vaccine came around. And then you introduce a vaccine here, there, and there, and the numbers go down dramatically. Now, what is the goal of vaccination? It's not necessarily to vaccinate every person, but it's to vaccinate enough people to get what we call herd immunity. And herd immunity is when you have so many people who have been protected in the community that those who are unprotected have a very little chance that they'll actually get infected. And so in this case, here you have a few people who have been vaccinated in blue in this diagram. And then you have one person
sharing the audio.
You have one person who is infected. And this one infected person can now go and infect others.
Yeah, I mean, as long as he knows it's still being recorded, that's...
Stelendor, we can hear you, so please mute. You can have all of these people now getting infected. When you have the opposite scenario, where you actually have most people vaccinated, 80% or thereabout people vaccinated, one person is infected, the probability of that person infecting many people goes down significantly. That's the whole idea of herd immunity. For COVID-19, the thought is that you need to vaccinate about 75 to 85% of the population to reach to the stage of herd immunity. Because remember, there are people in the population who cannot get a vaccine. They have underlying conditions that prevent them from getting a vaccine. Now, this picture that I'm showing you is kind of hard to look at because this 13-year-old on the left actually has smallpox. But what you should know is that these boys got exposed to the disease on the same day from the same person. And the only difference is that the one on the right got vaccinated and the one on the left did not. Vaccines work. Here is a line in the at Virginia Hospital in 1947, where people are lining up to get vaccinated against smallpox because it's such a devastating disease. It affected so many people, killed so many people.
That was polio. Yeah.
Everybody.
You know how roses are red became? Roses are red.
Just needed to have that vaccination happening. So again, the idea is here is your spike protein of SARS-CoV-2 binding to the receptor here. And the idea is that if we have neutralizing antibodies, those antibodies can come in and block, because you see the spike protein is like a key that the virus uses to unlock our cells in order to get in. And so what you're doing, you're literally coming and messing up the key, blocking the site that the key would attach to get into the human body. That's the process of a vaccine. Now, there are many, many vaccines that are being developed against SARS-CoV-2. There's never been an infection that has had such a huge effort to try and develop vaccines. So there are 37 in phase 1 where they're just looking at safety, 24 in phase 2, where they're looking at safety and efficacy. And then phase 3 is a trial where you actually look to see how well the vaccine works while you're still looking at safety. So we have 2 vaccines approved here in the United States, another 8 vaccines that have approval in different parts of the world, including the AstraZeneca vaccine that has approval in the UK. And there are 4 vaccines that have been abandoned for various reasons at this stage. And you're abandoning a vaccine, especially after you've gone through phase 1, 2, or even phase 3 trials, costs lots and lots of money. So here's a listing then of the vaccines that we have. Moderna and the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine have been approved in the US. The AstraZeneca vaccine has been approved in the UK. You have the Gamaleya vaccine that's been approved in Russia. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, they just got phase 3 clinical trial data out. There's about a 60% efficacy, which, by the way, is still really good. We've been spoiled with these 95% efficacy vaccines, but it's a real good vaccine, and it's a single-shot vaccine, the J&J vaccine, and that should be going up for approval for emergency use authorization really, really soon. So this is the vaccine landscape. Now, I just want to show you a little clip on the human genome. The human genome was sequenced in 2000. Where they were able to see all 3 billion letters that make up the human genome. And this will give you a little idea of what DNA is, what RNA is, so that in the next slide, when I talk about RNA vaccine, we will be on the same page. So just listen to this flow.
Life, a sunny day, a simple friend, and a complex biological story. The Human Genome Project is a way of exploring our molecular selves. Almost all of our cells, the muscle cells that let us smile, the brain cells that perceive the humor in things, the cells of our eyes that take it all in, contain a complete set of all our genes, the genome. If we could journey inside ourselves into a cell, we would see 23 pairs of chromosomes packed into a nucleus. Each chromosome contains a long coil of DNA. If all the chromosomes were unwound, the DNA in just one of our cells would stretch 6 feet long. The DNA double helix contains 4 kinds of building blocks. An A always pairs with a T, a C with a G. DNA contains information to make every part of our bodies with its 4-letter language. Each of our thousands of genes codes for a specific part. RNA polymerase copies the information in a gene into a messenger molecule, messenger RNA. The building blocks of messenger RNA and DNA are called bases. The bases on one strand of the DNA specify the order of bases on the new strand of messenger RNA. The DNA always stays inside the nucleus, but messenger RNA travels out into the cytoplasm. There, a protein-making machine called a ribosome can read messenger RNA to make a particular protein. Every 3 bases of the messenger RNA molecule codes for an amino acid. Proteins are made of amino acids. tRNA molecules help translate the language of DNA and RNA into the language of proteins. tRNA molecules bring the right amino acids that the ribosome links together to make a protein. Proteins are the laborers. Some form structures like tendons and hair. Others perceive light, scents, and flavors, control chemical reactions, and carry messages between cells. To understand our molecular cells, scientists have read the 3 billion letters making up the DNA in the human genome. Different sets of genes interacting with complex environmental factors influence things like our looks, personalities, and risks for diseases like cancer and heart disease. A growing understanding of our genes and all they do will help us understand the complexity and the wonder of life. A simple friendship, a sunny day, our life.
And this essentially is what the psalmist was talking about, and he said, we're fearfully and wonderfully made. With these 4 letters of the DNA alphabet, you have the coding for every single thing that is made in our bodies. And this is in every cell of the body. Now, this is a cartoon of a cell. The purple thing in the middle is depicting the nucleus. The DNA that you just heard about lives in the nucleus, right? That's where it stays all the time. The proteins that they just talked about are made in the cytoplasm. So the cell has 2 compartments. This outer area here where all these organelles are is called the cytoplasm. The inner part here, the purple part, is the nucleus. Right? Really important. The DNA resides in the nucleus. In fact, the cell thinks that the DNA is so very important that it doesn't allow it to leave the nucleus. Stays in the nucleus. And so then how does it make proteins from that instruction in here? It uses the messenger RNA. Okay? So the way I've described it before is, let's say that you have this great book. Maybe it was written 150 years ago with these unique recipes in it for certain pies and cakes and other types of things that you can make in the kitchen. And you want to make this special pie, but the only way to get the recipe is actually to go to the library and get this very old book that they're in. Now, the book is so unique that the library won't allow you to leave the library with it. It's on reserve. And so you have to go now pull it off reserve and photocopy the pages that you need, the pages with the recipe on it. And you take that now to your kitchen where you read off your recipe, you grab the ingredients and you make the cake. The DNA is depicted by the book, this unique book that's in the library. And the library is the nucleus. Your kitchen would be the ribosome. This is where proteins are made. And the photocopy would be the messenger RNA that you take out. So that's what that messenger RNA is. It's the instructions for how to make the cake. So you go into your kitchen and you make the cake. So there is what we call the central dogma of molecular biology, that you go from DNA to RNA to proteins, or you do what is called transcription, translation. You get a transcript of a particular gene that is in the nucleus. That transcript, that messenger RNA, leaves the nucleus, comes out into the cytoplasm as messenger RNA, and is translated the same way you're translating whatever ingredients are on the paper into making stuff, a product in your mixer and then putting it in the oven. And that's what a protein is. And so here's an animation that shows you a lot of processing happens of the messenger RNA. And I'm spending time on this because it's important to understand the biology, even a little bit, if you're going to appreciate how the vaccine is made.
When the RNA copy is complete, it snakes out into the outer part of the cell. Then all the components of a molecular factory called a ribosome lock together around the RNA. It translates the genetic information in the RNA into a string of amino acids that will become a protein. Special transfer molecules, the green triangles, bring each amino acid to the ribosome. Inside the ribosome, the RNA is pulled through like a tape. There are different transfer molecules for each of the 20 amino acids shown as small red tips. The code for each amino acid is read off the RNA 3 letters at a time and matched to 3 corresponding letters on the transfer molecules. The amino acid is added to the growing protein chain, and after a few seconds, the protein starts to emerge from the ribosome. Ribosomes can make many proteins. It just depends what genetic message you feed into the RNA.
Okay, so this is like a factory. We have inside of our bodies this protein making factory, and it will make any protein whose code it gets. And so essentially then, what these companies, Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna have done is that they've utilized this knowledge, because you see, when the virus infects us and it gets inside of our bodies, the virus literally instructs our bodies to make the proteins that it needs to reassemble itself. So what these companies have done is that they've taken the messenger RNA for just that spike protein that the virus uses to attach to our cells. And it has encapsulated in these lipid nanoparticles. So these are just fat molecules. They found out some time ago that if you encapsulate it in fat, it protects that messenger RNA when you inject it into the person. And now you can actually get it inside of the cells. Once it gets into the cell, it does not go into the nucleus. It stays in the cytoplasm. That is where the factory is. So you have to think about the cell as being 2 rooms that are round rooms. One inner room, the nucleus, that's where the DNA is. The outer room, the cytoplasm, it has several other things, but it has that protein factory there. And so what Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna did is that once the sequence of this virus came out in January, they didn't need to do anything but sit at their computers, look at what this genetic code was, and then they figured out what the exact code for the gene that make that spike protein, that key that the virus uses to unlock our cells. They literally took it over now to a piece of equipment called a DNA printer, where it makes a DNA copy, and then synthetic messenger RNA, in other words, in the lab, messenger RNA is created, packaged in these lipid particles that I talked about. And that's what's in the vaccine. It gets injected in you. And once it gets into the system, your body now takes these messenger RNA copies, these photocopies, and they read off the ingredients that it codes for and make proteins, the spike protein. So if you see, these little spikes are being made, not the virus itself. So here's an animation of that.
mRNA technology has never been used before in an approved vaccine, but scientists are using it now to combat COVID-19. mRNA, or messenger ribonucleic acid, are snippets of genetic code that tell cells to build proteins. mRNA vaccines take advantage of that protein-building process to trigger an immune response and build immunity to SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. Instead of using a small dose of live or dead virus like some other vaccines, mRNA vaccines use a tiny piece of the virus's own genetic material. Here's how it works. This is the virus. These are called spike proteins. Scientists have isolated the genetic code for those proteins, a set of instructions that are put into the vaccine so your body knows how to make them. Your immune system won't make an actual virus particle, but it will make copies of the angry red spike protein. In other words, no gray ball, but an angry red spike. Once vaccinated, your body starts making those spike proteins, so your immune system will develop antibodies to fight the
real thing, SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccines that are created for COVID-19 will be the first licensed mRNA vaccines ever.
So it's important that you realize that although these are the first mRNA vaccines that will ever be created, the mRNA technology is not new. Here's a paper that was published in 1992, February of 1992, that actually was looking at the mRNA technology to reverse a type of diabetes, right? So the whole idea of mRNA as a therapeutic was there. Here's a 2017 paper looking at using mRNA to make a rabies vaccine. Here is another paper that was published in 2019 looking at making a flu vaccine using mRNA technology. Here is a release from Moderna looking to make vaccines using this mRNA technology for Zika virus. Here is another paper, January of 2020. This January 9th of 2020. At that time, the sequence had just come out. They're putting out a news release here that they're trying to make a cytomegalovirus vaccine, and they're in phase 1 trial. In other words, they're already in humans trying to make a vaccine against this. And I could go on and on. mRNA vaccines, a new era. This is a 2018 paper that was published. Here is another one looking to use it for type 2 diabetes, 2019 paper. And so again, this is not a new technology. It's just that we've never had a vaccine go to market before using the technology. But the technology is about 20 years old proper. So what is in these vaccines? What is actually in these vaccines is the mRNA that I talked about, multiple copies of it, plus fats, because it's encapsulated in this fat ball. You can think about it as a little ball with the messenger RNA inside of the middle of it, and this fat is around it. There's polyethylene glycol, which is used to actually hold the membrane together and help it to fuse to the cellular membrane, and then salt and sugar. These vaccines, the Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna vaccines have no preservatives in them, right? And pretty much all they have is the messenger RNA, the fat, and all of that. Neil deGrasse Tyson, that many of you might know, one of my favorite scientists, said, one of the greatest challenges in this world is knowing enough about a subject to think you're right, but not enough about the subject to know when you're wrong. And that has been the challenge throughout this pandemic, with myths that have come, that have said that this virus was created by government labs and the government is using it to kill people, to the fact that the vaccine was rushed. And typically when I hear somebody say the vaccine was rushed, it gives the appearance that steps were skipped. And those steps were skipped for making the vaccine. Did it happen fast? It absolutely happened super fast. So I can talk about that some more. That this vaccine will edit your DNA. But as I showed you, there's no way that your mRNA could edit your DNA. The mRNA is in the cytoplasm, your DNA is in the nucleus, right? mRNA and DNA are completely different languages, right? They don't integrate. RNA doesn't go back into the nucleus and integrate into RNA. So that's also something we can talk about. That the vaccine causes infertility in men and women, and sterility in men. Just not the case. When the vaccines were given out, it wasn't purposely given to pregnant women, but I think something like 23 women who got the vaccine became pregnant during the clinical trial. Okay, so there you go. That the vaccine caused irreversible adverse events. This is a vaccine, it's a medication. It will cause adverse events, everything from headaches to fever to pain at the injection site, but these are all reversible. Even for those people who have anaphylaxis or this whole body allergic response, these are reversible events. That vitamin D and other supplements and plant-based supplements can prevent or even treat COVID-19. There's absolutely no data that suggests that. And when you get it, you can show it to me. That the government and Bill Gates have conspired to place microchips in the vaccines to track us. Absolutely not true. If the government needs to track you, all they need to do is to tap on the device that you actually are using to connect right now, right? I mean, it would be silly for them to waste time trying to put microchips into multi-dose vaccines. Remember, each of these vials contain enough for either 5 or 10 doses of the vaccine? How would you ensure that microchips are in every dose of less than a half a mil that you're putting into a dose? And that wearing masks will lead to buildup of carbon dioxide that can be bad for your health. Remember, carbon dioxide is a gas. It diffuses very readily through whatever mask you're wearing right now. So that also is a myth. Here's why the vaccines were created so quickly. The typical process that we go through for making a vaccine is the process of figuring out which protein is going to be immunogenic, is going to stimulate a good immune response, developing a technology to make that protein, either through using other bacteria or some factory means, then purifying it, make sure that no toxic substances are in it, then getting enough, figuring out how much of it will work, and then now trying to mass produce that, put it in somebody to make the vaccine. You didn't have to do that with the mRNA technology because most of it was done on a computer, right? The second reason is because the technology, the mRNA technology, was literally ripe for the taking. It had been in development for nearly 20 years, and it was just right at that time. They got a head start of everybody else. The other thing that they did is that they had overlap of phase 1 and 2 trials. Typically, in a general time when you don't have a terrible pandemic, you would complete your phase 1 trial, then move to phase 2 trial, then move to phase 3 trial. What they got authorization from the FDA to overlap trials. So as phase 1 started looking good, they started phase 2. In other words, more people in the trial. Once phase 2 started looking good, they started phase 3. They overlapped. And then at the time when they start phase 3, they actually started mass producing the vaccine doses. You would never do this under normal circumstances because no company, especially small companies like BioNTech and Moderna, would have the money to do that.
What just happened? Hold on 1 second. Just switched over since something went wrong with their page. Why is no volume playing out here? They recording and forgot to turn on their sound. Oh yeah, I can't win.
And you can go to these markets. One of the things that is common.
Hi, I am a registered nurse in Nashville, Tennessee, and my name is Kalila Mitchell. I'm reaching out to everyone about the COVID-19 vaccination. I recently took the COVID-19 vaccination. After the shot, I felt fine, but within 3 days, I went to the doctor because I had problems with my face. The whole left side of my face, actually. I have Bell palsy now. And as you can see, I can't smile. I'm trying to smile. It's kind of embarrassing for me. But I just want everyone to know that I think this vaccination is the worst thing ever. And I would not give this to anybody, even my worst enemy. Please, America, they do not care about us. Do not take this vaccination.
So very emotional, right? I mean, I saw this and almost immediately my heart was breaking for this young woman, but then there were certain things that didn't add up for me. She keeps saying this vaccination is a vaccine. People in the medical field typically don't say I got this COVID-19 vaccination. vaccination is a process, the vaccine is a product. And then she says Bell palsy instead of Bell's palsy. So, but I waited and then went and fact checked it. And so did many other people. And so what they came up with is that she said she identified herself as a nurse from Tennessee and gave her name. Well, it turns out that there's no nurse in Tennessee by that name. Number two, they went and checked the entire other 49 states. There is absolutely no nurse with that name and or description. So the question is, why would somebody put this out if it's not true? You see, the thing is that you have to be mindful of is that when you're seeing these stories, is how clever the anti-vax movement is. The vaccine rollout in this country was started, actually gave the vaccine to an American nurse as the first person. The response by the anti-vax movement was to put a video like this out, to show an African-American young woman claiming to be a nurse, got the vaccine and got one of the worst possible side effects you could possibly get from a vaccine. And the impression that if you get such a side effect, it will be permanent. So you have to be very careful about what you listen to and what you read, because people will use it to try and get you. And that's now, and take some of your questions that you might have. Dr. Honore or Sister Honore, if there are questions, I'm not sure how the question will work.
Yes.
Sister go ahead.
So we want to basically apologize for some of the technical issues that some people are saying, but we've reached the time now for questions. And in looking at the questions, one talks about side effects, or can you guarantee that there are no long-term side effects? So there are a number of questions dealing about safety and side effect of the vaccine. Dr. Webley, would you be able to address those, please?
Yeah. So again, this is a medication. There's no way anybody can guarantee that you won't have side effects. Where long-term side effects from vaccines are concerned, that's highly unusual. In fact, when you looked at the FDA data, the FDA went back and ran, some statistics for the past 50 years, looking at all the vaccines that they've approved. And they realized that the average time for side effects to be reported is within 2 months of people having gotten that vaccine. And that's why neither both the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, they waited for 2 months before they applied for emergency use authorization. After that, it will be highly unusual to have any side effects from a vaccine. A vaccine of this type. Remember, this vaccine doesn't contain the virus. This vaccine doesn't have preservatives. This vaccine doesn't have a lot of the other things that some traditional vaccines might have. All that it has really is this piece of message, or these pieces of messages that tells it, the body, to create proteins from this, so that now the immune system, once the immune system sees these proteins, it realizes that they're foreign, and it makes antibodies against it. It has memory cells and plasma cells and all of those created. So once the message has been read, so what these two companies did is that they caused each molecule of messenger RNA to produce multiple copies of the proteins, probably up to 100 copies of the proteins from one message. But once that message has been read and all the proteins have been, the messenger RNA gets destroyed. All right, messenger RNA, like anything else in the body, is susceptible to enzymes in the body destroying it. So it gets destroyed. It doesn't stick around for a long time. Within hours of it being used up, it will be destroyed. Self-renews. So this is not sitting in your body for a long time. Yeah, so Evelyn, I see you waving your hand. Mute.
Well, while we're waiting, there's another question here. How long does immunity last after the vaccine?
Question, I wish we knew that, but we don't know that yet since the vaccines have just started being deployed widely, broadly. Remember that phase 1 of these trials started over the summer of 2020. You know, you're talking about May, June, people were going through phase 1, and those phase 1 people still have immunity. So we know that for at least that long, the immunity will last. But at this stage, it's too early for us to tell how long immunity will last against these vaccines. The hope is that it'll last for a long time, and that we'll be protected for multiple years with these things.
Okay, we're just getting bombarded with questions, so I'll just keep them coming. You said that the RNA vaccine is not a new science, but it is new.
Oh, yeah. Here we go again. I don't know what this church is doing. They don't know how to stream.
Said that the RNA vaccine is not a new science, but it is new, being used and tested on humans.
So it's not new, and it's not the first time it's being tested on humans. Again, as I showed in the papers that I showed in 2017, 2019, it was already being tested in humans for different types of vaccines and different types of products, including everything from cancer to diabetes. So this whole mRNA technology is something that has been around for quite a while. A couple of scientists at the University in Pennsylvania actually figured out this technology. And in 2005, they figured out how to actually prevent the mRNA. Because you see, before, when they took the naked mRNA and they put it in, it would just get destroyed. And so they had to figure out a way to stabilize it and a way to protect it. And so the technology was in development over a long period of time. In other words, I'm saying that this is not a technology that was developed once COVID-19 came about, right? It wasn't developed because of COVID-19. It was there before COVID-19 came around.
Okay. And another person is asking, it is said that the vaccine contained parts from human fetuses. What can you say about that?
That is absolutely not true. Again, as I told you, these vaccines, all they have in them is that they have the messenger RNA. They have some lipid particles. These are lipids, fats. Lipids are fats that are manufactured so that they can encapsulate the vaccine. They have polyethylene glycol, which is an agent that we use in the lab. It helps to make membranes fuse. So they probably keep the fat membrane together and help those fat particles to fuse to our cells. And then it has salt. It has normal saline, the 0.9% saline that you get when you go to the doctors. And they're giving you fluids, and that we use in all research labs all around. So that now is phosphate buffered saline. So it has different types of salts, potassium and some other types of salts, sodium chloride, of course. And then sucrose. Sucrose is a sugar that is put in it as an ingredient as well. That's all that's in these two vaccines. Now, there are vaccines that are being developed. So, for example, the AstraZeneca vaccine is on a completely different platform. The AstraZeneca vaccine is a viral vector vaccine. In other words, what they're doing, they're using a virus that doesn't cause disease to deliver the genetic code for this SARS-CoV-2 spike protein, right? So what they do is that they use this virus, adenoviruses, which we grow in our labs all the time, but they need a human or animal cell line in order to grow. And so what they do is that they grow them up in fetal cells, aborted fetal cells, and these fetal cells were aborted in 1963, to be precise. And what people don't realize is that cell lines are kept for hundreds of years if you actually have the capacity. In -80 freezers, we have tons and tons of cell lines in our -80 freezer. At any time we're ready to grow them up, we just go and thaw them, and put them in an incubator at 37 degrees and they grow. So those are the cells that they grow these adenoviruses, these Trojan horse viruses in. Then they purify them out of the human cells. And that's what they give to the person. So that's the AstraZeneca and other vaccines that use these viral vectors. The vector itself, the virus itself, has to be grown in something. Can't just leave it growing on its own. And so essentially then, there are no human or animal products in the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines.
Thank you. Another question here. These vaccines were developed so fast. How can we trust them as being safe when the manufacturers have protected themselves from liability?
So this is another common misunderstanding. And people say this because the anti-vax movement keeps saying it. Vaccine companies have never had liability for anything happening from a vaccine. The government has a system set up where you can go and report adverse events from vaccines and get compensated that way. No vaccine company in the history of making vaccine has ever accepted liability for any risk coming from the vaccines. Again, what I explained to you before towards the end of the presentation is that the vaccines, when we say that the vaccines were developed quickly, and based on the end of the question, how can we, say that they're not going to be dangerous? The idea is that somehow there's some fundamental steps that were skipped in the production of the vaccine, and that did not happen. These vaccines underwent the same scientific rigor that any vaccine would undergo, and they came out on the other side being safe and efficacious. So it is not true that these vaccines were rushed in the sense that, some steps were skipped. So here's the thing. Let's say that you went home and found your loved one fallen over in your living room. The first thing you do is that you get on the phone and you call 911, right? You don't expect that the ambulance is going to sit around in traffic, obeying every traffic sign, and then get to your loved one. You want them there as fast as you can, right? And so there are laws and rules in place where an ambulance can put on its sirens, every vehicle pull over, you give it space. When it reaches a red light, it cautiously goes through that red light so that it can get to you in the shortest time possible. That is what these emergency uses are. There are already rules in place, not because this ambulance getting the product out as fast as you can. And that's why these vaccines are under emergency use authorization and not full authorization, which means that every batch they have to look at closely to make sure that it actually has the same product that the initial batch that was authorized actually has.
Thank you. From Myers to everyone, the mRNA vaccines methodology of using our cells, ribosomes to make protein sounds similar to the way coronavirus works in overpowering a cell to make copies of itself. How much spike protein can the vaccine cause the body to make before mRNA is destroyed?
Okay, good question. So you're right. It's the same thing that the virus does, and any virus or any microbe that is an obligate intracellular. It has to co-opt or hijack the body's systems or factory, protein-making factory, to make its own protein so that it can be productive. As to how many copies can be made, one mRNA copy that is put in for the BioNTech vaccine specifically can actually cause 100 copies to be made, because the person who's asking seems to know a little bit about the science. So what they did is that they put a poly-A tail on the end of the sequence, and they put 100 A's on it, which means that it can make 100 copies if it does it efficiently. So you're talking about, for the dose of the vaccine with about 30 micrograms of mRNA, probably in the order of about 11 to 15 billion copies of protein, of spike protein would be produced. And that's decent amount of protein, but not an overkill.
Okay.
Thank you for that, doctor. The next question deals with the shot. So what happens if you're not able to get the second dose? And will you be needing to have a yearly vaccine?
Yeah. So now with the shortages that we're seeing, that's a concern as to whether or not you'll be able to get the second shot in the time period that is necessary. You should be able to get the second shot, period. But within that time frame of 21 days for the Pfizer, 28 days for the Moderna. I don't know. I don't know what will happen. My thought is that the authorization that was given by the FDA is for what we saw in the clinical trial. The clinical trial had these vaccines, these shots, this booster shot after that period of time that I just specified. Nobody really knows what happens if you go beyond that. Now, from an immunologic perspective, in theory, nothing big should happen. You will still have memory cells there. You should still have cells that can ramp up the immune system. The question is whether or not you'll get to that exact 95%, or it will be 92% or 91% based on the amount of time. Remember that timing is important, because what you're doing is that you're giving your body enough time to maximize the production of antibodies and maximizing the production of memory cells, which are really important in that booster, because what you're doing is that you're now increasing the levels of circulating antibody proteins that can neutralize the virus, but you're also neutralizing your pool of memory cells, and so that you can have those over long term. Now, as to how long this protection will last, we just don't know how long this protection will last from this from these vaccines. We just have to wait and see.
Okay.
Then the next question deals with the, let's see, there are a number of questions and I'm trying to kind of loop them all together. So the next question is, can you comment on the efficacy of the current vaccine on the new strains?
Yeah, good question. So these new strains of the virus, you have this B.1.1.7 strain out of the UK. And then you have that 501 strain out of South Africa. There are other strains coming out of Brazil and other places, and that's always a concern. But this is what viruses do. They're constantly mutating. And although this is an mRNA virus, it actually has a proofreading system, believe it or not. So it has a system like your spell check on your computer that catches its mistakes and correct them. That is why we don't have more mutations than we have now. If it didn't have that, it would be like an HIV, where it makes mistakes randomly and you can't really catch up with them. The more you have the virus spreading in the community, the more chances you have of making these mutations. The good news so far is that the the Pfizer vaccine, they've gone back and checked and found out that a paper just came out that showed that it offers pretty much full protection against the UK strain. However, when they looked at they're now looking at the South African strain, and that is not offering full protection. However, the level of protection that it offers is still enough to protect you from having serious disease. Because remember, you're talking about a 95% protection from these. That has never happened before for anything that we've seen, probably beyond measles. So, you know, at the time when these vaccines were being developed, the thought was that if we got anything that had 50% protection, we would gladly take it, right? But these vaccines now are offering very high level of protection, which means that they have some buffer, that even if there's a reduction in protection, there will not be this total avoidance of antibodies that are being produced. And so that's our hope. However, even if it's the case that the new strains have evaded the vaccine, because of the ease with which you can redo this platform, they can just go in and redo the mRNA and make a new mRNA vaccine that we would get as a booster that could protect us. Now, the other part of the first question that I forgot to answer is whether or not you would have to get a booster each year. The hope is not. The reason you have to get a flu shot each year is because you're getting different strains of the flu virus. That's not the same case with this new virus, with this coronavirus. Again, it has a proofreading system, not making as many mistakes. The idea is that one vaccine should protect you over multiple years until the amount of antibodies have waned. And again, we don't know how long that is. We will find that out as time passes.
Okay. And we just want to let our listeners know that we did have technical difficulties. This program will be replayed in its entirety on our social media pages so that everybody can hear what took place today. Let's go now to another question. I heard of people who took the vaccine and came down with the virus. Any comments on that?
Yes. So if you get the vaccine, let's say I got the vaccine today and got exposed to the virus a week from now, I would still get infected. Because remember that 2 week that I told you about? It takes that much time for you to produce protective antibodies. But even so, even after getting both doses of the vaccine doesn't prevent infection. The vaccine prevents disease. You have to get infected for the vaccine to protect you. That's true for every vaccine. So there's no vaccine that puts up a shield around you that says no virus can enter this house, right? That's not what vaccines do. What vaccines do is that they prime your immune system so that when you actually encounter the virus, you probably don't even know that it was there because the immune system just takes it out, right? And neutralizes it and prevents it from causing disease. So that's essentially what the vaccine is designed to do. So for people who have gotten the first shot of the vaccine and haven't yet gotten the second shot, they only have about a 50-something to 60% protection. For these AstraZeneca and Moderna vaccines, after you've gotten the second shot, under the best case scenario, you have a 95% protection. In other words, the probability of you developing severe disease to the point where you're sick, have to be in bed, or have to go to the hospital to get treated is less than 5% of people in 100, right? So 5 in 100 might need that. But overall, that's what vaccines do. They prevent you from having severe disease to the point where you're going to have long-term sequelae. And I showed you like the COVID tongue and the loss of taste and the loss of smell and the nausea and the difficulty breathing and the intestinal problems and the kidney problems that this virus is able to cause. The vaccine will be able to protect you from all of those.
Okay. Okay. I just lost the chat.
Somebody's sharing their screen. Somebody's sharing their screen. You have to stop screen share.
Whoever is sharing a screen, please stop. Thank you.
Screen share is still there. It's Lynette. You're sharing your screen.
Okay.
You should be able to go up to the top and stop the screen share, Dr. Honore, if you have full.
All right. Let me get to another question.
One question is, could you speak to the major difference between the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine?
Yeah, I mean, they used a little variation in the code for the way they developed their vaccines. They used a different combination of lipids. But really, the major difference is that the Pfizer vaccine requires ultra cold temperature. It requires you to have the vaccine stored at minus 80 degrees prior to you opening it up and going in. And once you go in, you have a limited amount of time before you have to use up all the doses. For the Moderna vaccine, it's stored typically at a minus 20, and after you open it, you have up to 30 days that you can use it. Says one of them, the Moderna, each vial has 10 doses in there. The Pfizer has 5 doses, but overall they offer similar levels of protection. You know, you're talking about 94 point something to 95% protection. So they're very, very similar in the way they're made. They're both mRNA vaccines. That's why they have similar efficacy. So they're not huge differences.
We're going to allow some participants to ask questions directly. So we're going to open up. You are allowed to unmute yourselves now if you want to ask a specific question while we wait. Are there any people, any category of people who don't need to take the vaccine?
Okay, thank you. This vaccine was not tested. None of these vaccines were tested on anybody below age 16. So anybody below age 16, so for the Pfizer vaccine was tested on 16 years up, the Moderna vaccine was tested on 18-year-olds up. So anybody under those ages are not eligible to take the vaccine. The vaccine was not tested on pregnant women. And so if a person is pregnant, you wouldn't be given the vaccine, although I have a friend who is pregnant and opted to take the vaccine. Other groups could be people with severe allergic reactions, people who, especially when they get injected, have severe allergic reactions. Those individuals might not want to take the vaccine, or they'll be advised to talk with their doctors and take the vaccine under observation. In other words, in a medical facility where there's an EpiPen available, just in case you have an anaphylactic shock. Outside of that, there probably are people who have a lowered immune system. You know, people who are probably undergoing chemotherapy, for example, that might have wiped out your immune system. You don't want to take the vaccine. Not that the vaccine is going to do you anything, but that you might not be able to make the type of response that you need for protection. This has not been put out there, but under my impression is that this vaccine should not be given to individuals who are so sick that they've been given a short time to live. Because it's very likely that the fragile state in which they are, when the vaccine is given, it will ramp up inflammation that could actually be detrimental to the health of these individuals. You know, they're people who can barely move. Any sort of fever would be damaging to them. And when you get a vaccine like this, any vaccine that's going to work properly, the first thing that's going to happen is that your immune system is going to ramp up. When your immune system ramps up, it's like having a V8 engine that you're revving, you know, at all the time. It's going to get heated.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, thank you for the presentation, Doctor. I was just wondering that if it is possible, as you've been presenting the information, that a completely safe vaccine could be produced in 10 months, then why has the protocol been that nothing has been released as far as medication or vaccine development? Nothing actually has been released to the public after several years of observation and testing. I guess that's the part that doesn't seem to connect for me. These protocols seem to have been put in place for a reason and for observation, but here it seems like, okay, 10 months, we have everything we need. You know, you've mentioned the mRNA technology has been out there for 10 plus years, but nothing has actually been distributed or made for public consumption. It's only been stuck in the phases, which was part of the original protocols put in place. So why the disconnect? Why is it all of a sudden now that it's found that it's okay or it's safe to be placing the vaccine out for public use in such a short amount of time without really any knowledge? I mean, despite what you were stating, which I can understand, you know, they're not seeing any side effects, but at the same time, historically, they haven't put out anything at this large a scale that's been made in this specific form to actually observe if there are any long-term side effects. You're dealing with manipulating genetic information. And
Right, can we allow him to answer? Go ahead.
I'm sorry, thank you.
Yeah, I get the question and I get the passion that it comes with as well. However, science is science, right? The science bears this out. And so what you're talking about apples and oranges. The original vaccine platforms that have been used required that amount of time. So it wasn't that you know, phase 1 was taking 3 years because they were observing for long-term side effects. That's not the purpose of the phases. The reason the phases were taking that long was because they just couldn't get them to go any faster, right? The reason you're waiting for phase 2 and phase 3 to give you data is that most of the diseases that you were testing on weren't around in the level that SARS-CoV-2 has caused disease. In other words, they were able to turn around these vaccines quickly because they were able to get data from their clinical trials in a very short time. When you're having 200,000 people being infected each day, it doesn't take a long time before people in your different phases of your clinical trial to get infected with the virus, which is exactly what you want. So let me explain to you what is going on in clinical trials. In the phase of a clinical trial, what you're trying to do, that you're looking to see when where's the 5? Whatever that is, where's the 5? You mute.
I have to mute everyone again because it's just not going to work if all the mics are open. Go ahead, doctor.
Yeah, so, in your phase 1 clinical trial, let me just explain clinical trials a little bit to see if I can answer this question. Your phase 1 clinical trial is done on a handful of people, 40 to 50 people at most. And what you're doing in phase 1 clinical trial, you're doing a couple things. You're not even testing to see if the vaccine works in your phase 1 clinical trial. What you're doing is that you're trying to see if it is safe. And so you're doing what we call dose escalation studies. In other words, you're giving different groups of people different doses of the vaccine, and you're seeing which group has side effects or adverse events that are outside of what you would feel is acceptable based on prior vaccine studies. You're hoping that you'll see some data that shows efficacy, but that's not the primary goal. Moreover, the sample size is too small to determine that. So once you've done with phase 1 clinical trial, you go into phase 2, where you get to do hundreds of people. And now you can actually have the statistics to look at efficacy. There's nothing that says you have to wait X amount of time for a phase 1 or a phase 2. The phase is done when you have enough people in the study who have had the shot over a period of time. Phase 3 clinical trial now is where the rubber hits the road. This is a double-blind, case-control study where you give one group of people a placebo, maybe you give them some sugar and water or some saline or something like that, and you give the next group the vaccine. So you enroll a lot of people, tens of thousands of people. In this case, for both the Pfizer and the AstraZeneca and the Moderna vaccine, over 30,000 people. I think the Pfizer had 40-something thousand people were enrolled in the study. Half of them were randomly given a placebo. The next half was given the vaccine. Neither the patient nor the vaccine company nor the person giving the vaccine knows who is getting vaccine versus placebo, right? You tell these people to be safe, to wear their mask, to not go out and congregate. But as the vaccine company and the scientists running it, you kind of hope they don't listen to you. Because if nobody gets exposed, you won't know what works. So what these vaccine companies did is that they didn't wait for their 30,000 people to get exposed. They had specific language in their approval that said after 90 people or after 50 people or after 150 people have gotten exposed, then you'll unmask the data and look at who is who. Remember that they're using a third party here to look at these studies. The vaccine company is not looking at these data, at this data set. It is a third party company whose job it is to look at that. And so again, if this happens in 2 months, why would you wait 2 years to report on the data, right? If you expect to have, because they're doing power analysis for those who do statistics, they have to do a power analysis to see, can we actually extrapolate from this data? And essentially what happened is that when these companies released their initial data, and it's not true that we have all of the data from these trials, right? And I can give you links to these. When they opened the data, what they realized, for example, from the Moderna trial, they realized that they had something like 170 people in their test who had been exposed to the coronavirus based on testing via PCR. Or I think it might have been 190. And when they opened it up, they realized that of that 190 who got infected, only 8 of those in the vaccine arm got infected. All of the rest were the placebo group. Whoa. You couldn't sit on this. This is something you report and this is something you move on, right? And because, again, the government is bankrolling this, once they get that data, they're already producing this vaccine. Typically, it would finish phase 3, then you start production, and you get approval of production. That was not the case here. That's why it happened so quickly.
I'm going to combine a few questions that are heading in the same direction. There are comments here that natural remedies are available to help people with a lowered immune system. And another person comments that healthy eating is the best remedy, and people are taking the vaccine for a quick fix. Build the immune system through the 8 laws of health. Do you want to react to that? What role does a healthy immune system play? So 3 questions combined into one.
Yeah. I will always advise people to be the healthiest you can possibly be. Whatever it is that ramps up your immune system and that gets you at a place where you're most healthy, that's where you want to be. But how do you know how healthy your immune system is? What specific tests have you done to determine the health of your immune system? Remember, the worst sequelae, the worst symptoms that we get from COVID-19 infection is not necessarily from the virus. It's from an immune system that's overreacting. And I want you to realize that. You've ever heard about a cytokine storm? You don't get a cytokine storm from a weak immune system. You get a cytokine storm from an immune system that's going full. Go read it up and look at anything you have. Now, the 8 laws of health. The 8 laws of health are there to help us to live long-term good lives. And if we have chronic illnesses like diabetes and heart disease, those are the things that are staved off by the 8 laws of health. When you have an infectious disease, it's a completely different room that you found yourself in. Why? Because unlike chronic diseases like diabetes, an infectious disease will kill you within days.
Cancer is going to go away.
It doesn't matter
because you're boiling some Cerasee
supplement
or you're
take,
taking some.
It doesn't matter what it is that you do. You cannot prevent
like that. It's now out of
COVID-19.
control.
You cannot prevent SARS-CoV-2 from infecting you.
Now,
there
a vaccine is not what's actually going to fully protect you. It's your immune system that's protecting
any herb,
so even if you're taking the vaccine,
who tries to sell you this, you know they're not being truthful.
For the vaccine to work
and I would say, show me the data. Show me the clinical trials data.
You already have, right? The vaccine is just priming your immune system to work properly because of what I told you before. Your immune system has never been exposed to a microbe. You can't have protection. All you're doing is that you're priming your immune system to say when.
And the 8 laws of health is the way you should go. You will die before the 8 laws of health because you're boiling some Cerasee or you're taking some cod liver oil or something like that. It's now out of control, and you can't control it.
When you see this thing, it is foreign. Now, it is not.
A vaccine is not what's actually going to fully protect you.
Let me ask a question here.
I raised my hand.
So Doc, we are so thankful to have you on this program this evening.
I raised my hand.
So Doc,
Nope.
Take it away. All right, so the song.
Nope.
Immune system for the vaccine to work well.
You, doctor.
Hi, can I ask a question?
You see that bug, respond to it, right? That's the purpose of a vaccine. It's not taking over your body. It's telling your body that when you see this thing, it is foreign, it is not good, take it out.
Okay. We're going to...
Let me ask a question here.
Can I ask one?
I raised my hand.
So Doc, we are so thankful to have you on this program this evening. It is much better than all of the programs that we've even heard from the Department of Health and from other agencies. Your scientific presentation is done in such a simple way. has been very, very important for this community. Now, the question is that I have is the more spread, the more infections that happen, is it the more mutations that we would have? And the more mutations that we have is the more variants that we would have, and the more variants would cause the more deaths in this disease?
You're right on, Pastor. That's exactly what we're running away from here. That if this outbreak is not stopped soon, you'll have more and more of these variants that evade even the vaccines that are currently available. And that's the trick now, that you get as many people protected, vaccinated as possible, so that you slow down the spread, you slow down the infection. For every new person that this virus infects, and for every new round of infection, it has a possibility of making another mutation. And many of those mutations do not make anything that's better at binding or transmitting or infecting than the previous one. Every now and then the virus gets lucky and it gets a mutation that makes it much more capable of infecting or being transmitted. And then that variant will take over. And if it's and here's the thing, the mutation doesn't have to be more deadly. If it's more transmissible, which is what the virus is going after, then what eventually is going to happen is that you're going to get more people infected. And if more people are infected, then more people are going to get hospitalized. And if more people are hospitalized, then more people are going to die. Right? That is the bottom line here. And so the idea is, again, these are vaccines that have been proven to be safe. And now, I can't promise you that a year from now, one or two people won't show up with something that they find is vaccine related. That, because we haven't seen that. It's not a normal thing to happen with vaccines, but then again, it's not a normal vaccine. What are we afraid of? That people are going to change into rabbits, or that somebody's going to die from a vaccine? That's absolutely not going to happen, right? That I can tell you. Scientifically, that absolutely will not happen. So, my thing is that the vaccines, getting to a level of herd immunity, will calm down this infection. COVID-19 will still be around in some form or another. This virus is not going away. The fact that we had vaccines for it doesn't mean that it's all of a sudden just going to pack up and leave us alone. It has figured out a good source of replicating itself, and all it needs are people who are susceptible. So it will continue to be around in our communities.
I still want to make this.
Let's go to.
What is your suggestion for someone who has already?
Hand up. Can you ask your question?
Yes, please. I have a question dating back to what you just said before in the chat. You said RNA manipulations are not new, that it started as early as 1992. So my question for you is, how come we already came with a vaccination or vaccine within 10 months with a new virus using RNA?
I never use the word RNA manipulation, because that's not exactly what is being done. What you're doing is that you're doing exactly what the virus does. And I want you to understand that when any virus like this, especially RNA viruses, positive strand RNA viruses, infect the body, they do exactly what this vaccine is doing, right? They use the body's protein-making machinery to make their proteins. The only difference with this vaccine is instead of making the 30 proteins that the virus has, it's making a single protein. It's making that spike protein. Because we know that if you block that spike protein, the virus can't get in. Now, the technology is like having a software, right? So you might say, how could you work out this calculation when we just gave it to you? And my answer would be, because we already had the software for that calculation. The mRNA technology is the software that was there in place, that they had been testing and refining over time. The other thing you have to realize that I didn't mention, and that's my fault, is that this virus, while this strain of it is new, it's just a new family member. Since the SARS outbreak in 2003, they've been trying to make a vaccine against this family of viruses. So one of the things that people have missed is Dr. Corbett, who is the scientist at the NIH who had been working on a vaccine for SARS. She's actually an African-American woman. And she had already come up with a way, to figure out the sequence and the way the spike protein looks. In other words, she had all of that already in place for the original SARS virus. And so when this virus came around, the sequence was almost identical. In fact, the spike protein was almost identical. It's just that it was more efficient. They bound to the same receptor. So all that she did was they modified this now at the NIH to represent the virus that they knew, the new variant of the virus that they had, and then threw it on the same platform that had been developed, this software. And through that software, now you're able to make the vaccine. So again, I know it's hard to believe that somebody could make a vaccine in such a short time, but you have to remember that we've never had a situation where so many great scientific minds were put together to make a vaccine. So this tiny company down in Cambridge, Moderna, could never have done this on their own. But when you take the money of the federal government and the brains of the NIH and you combine that, that is what you get. BioNTech, this tiny German company that was started by a wife and a husband to look at mRNA technology to make different drugs, mostly looking at cancer and stuff like stem cell, they could never have pulled this off. And that is why they partnered with Pfizer. Pfizer is a massive vaccine company with production lines and equipment and factories all over the world, right here in Massachusetts. So with these combinations, plus the peer reviews and the brains of scientists all over the world reviewing everything that is put out. I have a Twitter group that I'm a part of, and every single thing about this virus infection, the pandemic, and vaccines are reviewed through scientists who I know and trust. And I have done the same thing. I've read all of the papers. I've read through all the data sets. These are solid vaccine technologies, and we can spend the whole night talking about whether or not it's safe because of how quickly it was developed. As I said to you, all of the data that is available points to the fact that these are safe and efficacious vaccines. There's nothing new that we're going to learn from what is there.
Dr. Webley, what is your remedial suggestion for someone? Dr. Webley, what is your remedial suggestion for someone who has already been hit by the virus in terms of recovery?
I didn't hear part of your question. For somebody who is what?
What is your remedial suggestion for someone who has already been affected by the virus in terms of recovery? What is your medical suggestion? What do you suggest?
Well, I'm not a medical doctor, so I can't give you a medical suggestion, but you should get the vaccine. If you have already recovered from the virus, the suggestion is that you get the vaccine. And the reason why the suggestion is that you get the vaccine is because, as I said before, when you got infected, there is nothing out there that says that you are fully protected, because the immune system is going after the entire house when all you really need to make a protection against is the door, right? And so the immune system is busy making antibodies and responses against the windows and the rafters and the roof and everything. But this specific vaccine targets the door that the virus uses to get in. And it has a robust response against the door. In other words, the door that the virus was used to get in, that is what is being protected by this vaccine. And so that is why the suggestion is that you do get vaccinated. Now, if you are in the throes of being infected with the coronavirus, if you just tested positive, the suggestion would be to wait at least 30 days to get vaccinated.
Thank you. I'm going to let Samsung, you've been waiting to ask. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yes. Hi, thank you, Dr. Robley, for your wonderful presentation. My question is, I never got sick, but I did the test. My test was negative. But when I did the antibody test, they find out like I have like antibodies. So my question is like, is it okay for me to take the vaccine, and when can I take it?
Yeah, it should be okay for you to take the vaccine, and you should take it when it's your age group. You know, and when your age group is at the place where you can take it. For example, I haven't gotten the vaccine. And it's not because I don't want it. It's because I'm not in the age groups and in the group, the demographics of people who are getting it now. But
I can take it because I'm a registered nurse, but I was just being cautious to find out exactly, since they find like I have the antibodies, that means I was exposed. So that's why I said I want to know for sure when can I take it. So that's
I mean, in my opinion, I think you should be able to take it. And as I said, if you had just gotten exposed, then you can wait a month or so. But then I would take it because I think the vaccine offers a better protection than you would have gotten from being naturally infected.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Monica H., you've been waiting.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hi. Thank you so much. And thank you for the excellent presentation, Doctor. So my question is, I just want wanted clarification when you were talking about the fact that, we just can't say, diet and all those kinds of things. I agree, because of the amount of deaths and things like that, vaccination is necessary. But at the same time, I'm a nurse. What I have been saying, because I give, COVID updates for my church, is that until the vaccine is available, because everybody can't get it right now, what I have been suggesting is that they do eat right, that they, exercise, that they rest, and while we cannot say vitamin D, zinc, and vitamin, what am I missing? C will protect against the virus. They still have innate immune properties in helping our immune system. So I say, while we can't say this will, prevent you from getting COVID, you still want to fortify your body so that if you get infected, you have something to fight with. Because if you're not getting rested, if you're not eating right, that's a more deficient, immune system. So am I saying something wrong? I just wanted some clarification based on.
You're saying exactly what I said about 10 minutes ago. I totally agree with you. So the point was that I didn't want people going around thinking that you can take any specific supplement or do anything physically that's going to protect you from getting infected, except wearing your mask, social distancing, because those are still the best ways to protect you from this virus if you can. That you wear your mask, you social distance, and you wash your hands and all of that. And so somebody else was asking repeatedly if the vaccine will have any effect on your offspring. No, this is not a vaccine that you can transmit to anybody. The vaccine doesn't give you the infection, and nothing's going to happen to your offspring, except that if you're a breastfeeding mom, one of my colleagues at the University of Massachusetts has shown that there are antibodies in the breast milk, so that infant could get some level of protection if they're being breastfed.
Dr. Webley, I have a quick question for you, and that is, I know there's a concern about the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine being mixed. If you take one, you have to be careful about which one you get for the second dose. Can you talk on that a little bit to help us understand how we should, if we decide to vaccine?
Yeah, good question, Pastor. So what I've said is I go back to the data, right? And again, that's why I'm a scientist. I think like a scientist. You go back to the data. What the data shows is the effect of getting the first dose of Moderna and then getting the second dose of Moderna gives you that 94 point something protection. Again, the first dose of Pfizer and then getting the second dose of Pfizer gives you that protection. Now, it is very possible that if you got the first dose of Pfizer and then got the Moderna second dose, it will increase the level of protection. But I don't know, and I don't know what that is. And nobody does, because those studies have not been done. So in my opinion, what should happen is that if you got whatever vaccine you got for the first dose, you should get that same one for the second dose. That's the only way you can ensure that you're getting the protection that we've seen in the clinical trials. That's why you do clinical trials, and that's why you follow clinical trials. And until somebody has done the testing and shown the data that those are, because even though they're the same mRNA vaccine, the Pfizer dose is 30 micrograms of mRNA, and the Moderna is 100. Right? These are different doses of viruses and of mRNA, and the mRNA is made in a different way, and so, I would say take the ones that are compatible.
I have a question.
Dr. Webley, just a question.
You made mention earlier of your immune system overreacting, right? Are you saying that your immune system can respond to the virus in such a way that that overreaction can end up killing you? That's what you're saying?
Absolutely. That's what allergy is.
Tell us about that a little bit more, because
that's what allergy is. When you have an allergic reaction, think about it. What is it about some innocuous pollen or dust that would make your body respond in that way? However, when your body sees that pollen or that dust for the first time, it goes ahead and it actually has antibodies made in a form that we call IgE antibodies, and those now sit on very specific cells in your system, and those cells actually have enzymes in them, and it is those enzymes, when they're released upon the next time you encounter that allergen, that actually leads you to the coughing and the sneezing and all of the respiratory issues you have. That's what allergy really is. Now, with the coronavirus, it's different. Essentially, the virus has a great way of entering the body where it is able to somehow silence the initial alarms. And the way I describe it is, let's say you have a fancy alarm on your house, right? Every window, every door is alarmed. When you went to bed, you know you turned it on, right? And then you're in your bedroom, you're sleeping, and you wake up in the middle of the night. No alarm has gone off, but you wake up and there's a man standing over you in your bed. You're so frightened because the alarm hasn't gone off. How on earth is this intruder in my bedroom? And so your mind goes wild. The fight response kicks in. And you take up the Bible off your bedstand and you throw it at him. You take up the next book that you have and you throw it at him. Everything because you're just so frightened, right? You're throwing everything at it. And that's exactly what happens with this virus. That the innate immune system, when a virus infects your body, there's a specific protein that should be triggered to tell the other cells that this intruder is here. The coronavirus, this current coronavirus, is somehow able to shut that down. And so it's able to replicate at will for a while before this adaptive immune response knows that it is there. And sooner or later, the adaptive immune response realizes it's there. But by that time, there's so many viruses, it's already causing so much damage. So the immune system throws everything at it. Everything. And that's what the cytokine storm is. The cytokine storm, cytokines are chemical messengers. It's how cells send text messages to each other. So it floods the system and shuts down the network with all of this cytokines and chemokines that cause fever and cause you to have these rashes as a result of all of that is happening. And the cells go haywire. Cells are being damaged. Immune cells are probably being infected as well. And that's what the immune response is. The virus, it's just a huge response, an overreaction that would not have happened if the innate immune system had shut the virus down even a little bit, which is what it's designed to do overall. So again, people who get sick and die from the virus, it's not necessarily because they had a weak immune system. We see young people who are getting infected with this virus and dying from it in the same way, in a similar way that older people are. But we do know that there are underlying conditions, heart disease and some of these other diseases, diabetes, and some of these other things that cause an increase in the amount of receptors that you have in your body for the virus.
I have a question.
Hello, I have a question. Hello. We want to begin wrapping up. We hear it in your voice. It's been a long day, and we really appreciate I am going to allow two questions. One I'm going to read to you. This is from Bubby's Galaxy. Please, my life depends on getting an answer to some of my docs say to say don't. I'm an Arab who has sickle cell anemia, and I know I am at high risk for serious disease if I get infected with COVID. However, my population was not allowed in the trials. Is it safe for people to take it without being represented in the trial?
Yeah, that's one of the issues here. And I would say wait. I would say talk with your physician. There are probably other underlying things that your physician would know, and see if your physician recommend that you get the vaccine under supervision, because that's an unknown right there. I don't remember seeing any sickle cell anemia patients in the clinical trials. I don't think they were. And so I think you're right. Although they had people with autoimmunity and other things, this is a very specific defect. And the other thing that would make me wait with the sickle cell disease is because we do see some differences in blood type and susceptibility to CVs from SARS-CoV-2, where blood type A seems to be more susceptible than blood type O. And we're talking about the same membrane, same red cell membrane that has these antigens on it. So for that reason, I would absolutely have a conversation with your medical doctor, your entire file, and be able to advise you on that.
All right.
Doctor, I have a question. You mentioned so much about the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine. What can you say about the Johnson & Johnson?
Thank you, Dr. Honoré. Thank you. So I would like to thank.
We'll go to Marcy, and then we'll have to call it a night.
Yes.
So
thank you. I would like to thank Doctor for the presentation. It's very knowledgeable. But he said that he hasn't taken the vaccine yet because of age group. Can you elaborate more on that, Doctor, please?
Yeah, so, the vaccine, as it's being rolled out, not everybody is eligible for it. They're now giving the vaccine to frontline workers, to medical workers. My wife has gotten the vaccine because she's a frontline worker. And then they're vaccinating people over the age of 65, older people who are more susceptible to the disease. Once that is done, so that you're talking about A and 1B, and then they're going to get to phase 2, where they'll be vaccinating another group. I'm not in that age group, any of those age groups, or in that demographic of frontline workers.
So about the shots, the first and second shot.
Thank you.
There is a time frame in which we get the second shot. If it lapses, do you now then have to go back and get the first shot, or would the second shot?
Oh, no, you would still just get 2 shots. The only question is, would it still have that 95% efficacy? And even if it drops, it probably wouldn't be by more than 1 or 2% at this stage. And hopefully you wouldn't have to wait more than, an extra week or something for the vaccine. At this stage, I haven't heard of people who have to wait. It seems as if everybody who got their first shot is getting their second shot.
Yes, okay, question, Pastor. You mentioned much about the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine. Can you say anything about the Johnson & Johnson who's next in line to come out?
Yeah, I did mention
and the nasal spray too.
And what about the cons to this? You said you're going to do pros and cons. We haven't heard any cons yet.
Yeah, what about the people who have died from taking vaccines?
And ivermectin. Just answer the question. You're throwing a lot of stuff at me. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is one of those viral vector vaccines, like the AstraZeneca vaccine that I mentioned. So essentially what they have is that they have a virus that is like a Trojan horse, and it will deliver the coronavirus protein, so that it's same spike protein, so that you can actually have production of antibodies against it. The data just came out on that. The phase 3 clinical trial data just came out on that, showing that it has a 65% efficacy across the population. And so that's a good efficacy. And so it's very likely that vaccine will be approved. The good thing about that vaccine is that it's a single shot, right? So you wouldn't have to go back for a booster dose. What the booster does is that it increases the level of antibodies you have in the system, but this vaccine works pretty well with a single shot of it because it does have a virus that it's using to deliver. So let me address this whole issue of people dying from the vaccine. That is not true. Nobody has died from the vaccine. There's a big difference between dying after you've received the vaccine and dying from the vaccine. Right? If I should gather everybody who is on Ring Central right now, all 400 people who are still on Ring Central, if I should gather all of you and give each of you $1, it is very likely that tomorrow somebody might have a car accident or 2. It is very likely that somebody will bump their toe going into their house. It is very likely that you know, somebody might die tomorrow. Who knows how many of us will be alive tomorrow? The fact that that happened to you after I gave you $1 doesn't mean that the dollar caused it to happen. It just means that you got it after the dollar. Now, here's what people are talking about. There is this Swedish group, I think, Norwegian group of individuals, of patients who got the vaccine. What they did is that because of the age range, they're giving people in nursing homes and hospice care the vaccine right now, right? And that's why I said there's certain people who I wouldn't give the vaccine to, because they're so fragile, they have a very little time to live. And in those individuals, the inflammation that comes from your immune response to the vaccine could be detrimental. However, they haven't found that to be the case in these individuals. In this Norwegian group, they have 40-something people dying, natural causes, across all of these nursing homes on a weekly basis. Between December and January of giving the vaccine, they had 20-something people who got the vaccine who actually end up dying. It doesn't mean that the vaccine led to their death. These are individuals who are most likely going to die anyway, because in other words, there was no increase in death after people were getting the vaccine. The same numbers of people were dying as were dying before the vaccine was given and after the vaccine was given. So you cannot attribute the vaccine to causing that. That's where statistics come in. It's really important that you look at the control groups, you look at people getting the vaccine, you look at what the underlying issue is. So the data does not suggest that. And the news media has been very irresponsible in sensationalizing this so that people will read their papers and putting this out. When you go back, everyone else definitely shows that the vaccine, because there's nothing in the vaccine to cause death, right? That would be the first thing that would make a vaccine get disqualified. There's nothing in it that will cause death. There's no live virus. There's no infectious agent. There is nothing like that. So you have to be careful in the way you read these things and you look back on it. Again, my thought is that they have to be more thoughtful in who they're giving the vaccine to, because for an 80-something-year-old fragile person who has a life expectancy of 2 months, they probably shouldn't get the vaccine, right? You want to look at that, but again, that's not my call.
May I ask one question?
Died due to the vaccine. Due to the vaccine.
Nobody has died due to the vaccine.
It has been clear they have alert.
Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank all of you.
I have.
What's that?
Wait, say that again. I didn't
We want to thank Dr. Webley for joining us today.
Dr. Honore.
More than his allotted time. We regret the glitches that we had earlier. Those have been corrected. And again, we will be rebroadcasting the entire program with sound in its entirety for the benefit of those who may have missed a part. Our goal this afternoon, as we mentioned at the beginning, has been to provide information. We are not telling you take the vaccine, and we are not telling you don't take the vaccine. But we want people to have science and information at their fingertips that they can use in making the decision. We also encourage you to go to the General Conference position on vaccines and read it for yourself before you make a decision. It's been a pleasure having you with us in the afternoon. It is our hope to continue to be able to provide information in the future. I don't know if Dr. Webley will be willing to come back, or if we can bring some other panelists and guests to keep the conversation going. But we owe Dr. Webley a debt of gratitude. It is comforting to know that we have knowledgeable Seventh-day Adventist people in all fields who can help us navigate through some of these questions. So thank you to all for joining us. May God bless you. Have a blessed week in the Lord. And we're going to turn it out over to Dr. Oswald Yule, who will have our closing prayer.
But Dr. Honore, he was supposed to talk about cons. The flyer said pros and cons, and we haven't heard any cons at all. So can you at least mention that?
We've heard cons about people who may have adverse reactions. We've heard cons about allergies. We've heard both sides, facts on both sides of the equations. And these are to help people make decisions. All right. And in the future, we can come back with more information. Dr. Yule?
Thank you, Dr. Honore. You let us bow our heads. Oh God, we thank you for Dr. Webley, a Christian scientist, one who is informed. We thank him for his intellect, his experience, his knowledge of science to share with us the concerns regarding the vaccines and other issues in the medical field. Continue to bless him as he continues to make an impact in the Adventist community and beyond. We're thankful, oh God, that we can come together as members and to listen and to learn so that we can make an informed decision about our health. You're the great physician who has never lost a case. You understand our pain, our predicament, and our situation. Lord, we also believe in prayer that we should communicate with you so that you can answer our prayers in these times of trials and difficulties and in this global pandemic. Protect everyone, every member.
Right now, I think it's finished. Let me just double check. Refresh this page. Come on. Reveal was live. All right, gentle people.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cheryl.
You're welcome.
Yes. Thank you very much, Cheryl. It was so much technical difficulty.
Whew, girl.
I came on, I came back on at least 3 times and
Yeah.
thank you.
Antibodies are still there.
Okay, no, sorry, that's an old one. Yeah, it was so much going on. A lot.
You know what? Go ahead, honey. I'm sorry.
No, I'm finished. You can talk.
I just wanted to mention, I have 3 children that have allergic reactions, that have anaphylactic reactions. I did not get a chance to make the question. And I really think this really merits further discussion, even if it's on the church level or the conference level. However, all 3 of them have anaphylactic. You there?
Yes, I'm here. You're hearing the baby.
Oh, okay. All 3 of them have anaphylactic reactions, and he did not mention anything about the recourse. If people in fact die that have allergies, if there's people with comorbidities, my son has epilepsy. My baby, the youngest one, has epilepsy. Since 1986, Vaccine Court, they have set it up in such a way that if you get this vaccine, there is no recourse. It is self-willed. If you go and get the vaccine until 2024, there is no recourse and nothing you can do if there is death, palsy. He didn't mention anything about those that they have confirmed. There's been 4 people that have had palsy or paralysis in their body, in their faces, and so on. There is absolutely no recourse. It's on the books. And even more than that, there was nothing mentioned about the RFID chips that I do have. Jay Walker, the CEO of Appy, admitted that they do have a chip associated with each and every viral. And it's there's a lot. It's optional whether or not those chips are what they're going to do with it. So I do have some rather serious questions. I did not get to interject and make mention of any of them.
Okay. Well, they're going to do another program. So when it comes, you can ask those questions and stuff, but I have to get to another meeting.
I understand. Well, thank you, darling.
You're welcome.
God bless.
You too.